Recording now. And gonna let everybody in. Lovely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I am currently seated, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before I begin this evening, I would just like to quickly reiterate some of the information that was mentioned to you in the email with your link to join tonight's event. So you've all automatically been placed on mute, but that doesn't mean that we won't be taking questions. Richard is certainly happy to answer some of your questions towards the end of the event if there's time, so please start sending these through. You can do so using the chat box. If you can't see it, then it should be opened by the button towards the bottom left of your screen. You can type your questions there and they'll come straight through to me, and I'll read them out at the end of the event when I'm prompted to do so. I'd also like to mention that at the moment we have a promotion on for everybody who attends our online events, which is that if you use the code EVENT, E-V-E-N-T at checkout, then you will receive 10% off your order site-wide. So I'll be posting the link to purchase your copy of Love Clancy in that chat box shortly. So I recommend that you get in early and make the most of that offer while we still have it on. And so it is now my pleasure to introduce Cass Moriarty. Cass is the author of The Promised and Parting Words. She's also a literary judge, a reviewer, and a regular interviewer for Avid Readers Zoom events. And Cass, it is my absolute pleasure to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Emma Kate. Lovely to see everybody tonight. I can see quite a few, I can see some faces I recognise, which is lovely. I just wanted to say to start off that Avid Reader continues to be at the forefront of keeping the literary community connected through their online events program. So please show your support for authors, publishers and booksellers by sharing tonight's event over social media, maybe taking a screenshot, and of course by buying many, many copies of this fabulous book, Love Clancy. And if you would like to keep up with the Brisbane literary mafia scene, tune in on the last Monday of every month as Chrissy, Nina and I chat to a legendary Queensland writer and discuss some great new Australian book releases. And next month we will be including Love Clancy on that. Now tonight we were supposed to be chatting to the famous author who has published a collection of letters written home to his family in the bush. Unfortunately, Kelpie Clancy is busy digging holes and eating cheese, and so he's ordered one of his staff, Richard Glover, to stand in his place. While we can all acknowledge that Richard is probably a poor replacement for Clancy, we're nevertheless very pleased to have him here tonight, and hopefully he can speak to us on Clancy's behalf. Richard is, of course, well known to many of you, not only as Clancy's best friend, which he writes about in his regular Sydney Morning Herald column, but he is the author of the simultaneously heartbreaking and hilarious memoir Flesh Wounds, the exploration of 1970s Australian culture called The Land Before Avocado, and many other books. He also appears on ABC Radio. Welcome, Richard.
Yes, thank you very much. And Clancy is here to monitor whatever is said. But as you can see, he's not bothered doing the interview himself. As you know, you'll have to rely on me.
Yeah, he will delegate that to you.
He's got better things to do, and he has trained. Part of the thing about the book is how good they are at training their humans. You know, the humans think that they're training the dogs, but actually the dogs are very good. It's 70 repetitions apparently does it.
I'm going to ask you about that actually. So yeah, we want to get into all that nitty gritty. So we're here tonight, obviously, for this book, Love Clancy, A Dog's Letters Home, which is a co-authored affair. So it's a compilation of insightful musings on life by your dog Clancy, who's sleeping there in the background, accompanied by your scribbled rights of reply, where you comment on Clancy's letters.
And defend myself against...
Defend yourself. I was going to say, it has to be said that often you're justifying what your dog has depicted as your very poor behaviour. But the result is a wise, a poignant, and a very funny book about what is important in life. And it's a really, I think, a nice uplifting book in these strange COVID times. So I'd like to start BC, before Clancy.
Yes.
So your previous Kelpie, Darcy, was with you for 15 years, and you wrote publicly and very movingly about his death a few years ago. Could you tell us a little bit about Darcy and how your writing about him resonated with so many people around Australia?
Yeah, well, you know, he was a great dog. Sorry, Clancy. They're all the best dog ever, aren't they? Every dog is the best dog ever, and he was the best dog ever, just as Clancy is the best dog ever. And you know, he had a good long life of 15 years. And when he died, I wrote a piece about it in the newspaper. And I've been writing pieces in the newspaper every week for 30 years. And there was no piece that has ever got a response like that one. And the piece was partly about how embarrassed I felt when I realised that the way I was crying over Darcy was more intense than the way I'd cried over my own parents dying. And, you know, I've lost quite a few friends, and there was something about the grief, and I felt sort of embarrassed to say that because it seems inappropriate, doesn't it? And I tried to I tried to acknowledge it, but also try to understand why it was. And you know, I think in the piece I came to the conclusion there's just something about a dog's love. It's so sort of pure and uncomplicated, and it's like they are just pure love, and that's why the grief that their death brings about is just so intense and unstoppable and unrestrained. So anyway, then there's this response to it, which was just phenomenal. And it was all these people writing in about their own dogs and what they'd given them in life. And you could almost do a linguistic analysis of the letters, you know, the words that we used about they're all handsome and, you know, good looking and loyal. And there was this sort of language that everyone used, and people wrote beautifully. The other thing that was really notable was people wrote really beautifully about them. It's like suddenly everyone had literary skill to describe the virtues of these dogs. And there are three of them that I've included in this book of the hundreds. And they're all about these sort of hero dogs, I suppose. And one's a story of a fellow whose house was on fire, and the dog comes in and the dog saves his life and is blinded as a result. And then the man writes about the last 3 years of this dog's life where he's blinded, but is so clever about moving around. As long as they don't move the furniture in the house, the dog still, you know, and he's so proud of the dog for all that, as well as saving his life. And then there's a letter from a farmer who has suddenly become very depressed and is thinking, you know, is thinking about the worst thing you can think about. And the dog knows, and the dog just sticks himself to this guy's thigh and will not leave him. He stays there for sort of 48 hours, just not willing to leave him, and until the farmer gets in the car and drives to the big town and goes and sees the psychologist. The dog knows, and the dog will not leave him alone. And the third one I talk about in the book is this young soldier from Afghanistan, you know, ADF soldier who's come back from Afghanistan with really bad PTSD, can't respond to the world at all, really. And his only connection really is with his wife, who sounds like this terrific woman. But that's it. And she insists that he goes down to the pound, and they go down and they find this dog, and he sort of writes about this dog and how it crawls over him and gives him this love and basically saves his life. And I love the fact that in all these letters and the hundreds of others, all these, the dogs are like these figures from Greek myth. They're like these great heroes from Lord of the Rings or something like that, but they're all called Rough and Tigger and, you know, Woolly and Woofy, and all these little kind of...
There's some really fantastic stories in the book about other dogs besides just Darcy and Clancy.
Yeah.
And in the book you say that after losing our precious Darcy, it turned out that our grief had only one answer, and his name was Clancy. So how did Clancy come into your lives?
Well, we did that thing which people do. I think you ring, just politeness really. You ring up the person you got the dog from 15 years before, and you say, look, this, thank you so much for this dog. It was such a blessing in our life. We want you to know that, he's passed on, and they were grateful for knowing that, and grateful that it all worked out so beautifully. And then at the end of the phone calls, there's this little sort of, actually, since you rang, we've just had another litter, and there's one puppy that is, you don't intend to get another dog for months, but you, of course, you open your heart, and I think it's interesting. They're very different in personality. Clancy's quite a different. He's sort of bolder and more self-confident in a way that I've tried to catch. I think.
Well, he writes a newspaper column.
Well, you can see it.
Darcy never wrote a newspaper column.
You can see it in the letters. I think he's got a very. But see, I think all dogs are like that to some extent. I think one of the pleasures, it was quite interesting when I first wrote a piece from his point of view, is I found it, and I hadn't particularly intended to do it. I just had a little idea, and I thought, and I found it instantly incredibly pleasurable to write, and readers instantly found it incredibly pleasurable to read in a way I don't think I've ever quite understood until recently, where I've been thinking about talking to you, how to explain it. And I think it is that they've got this self-confidence, really. I think human being, when you look at the world through human eyes, which we all do all the time, the world through human eyes is an anxious, difficult place. It's a wonderful place, of course it is, but it's anxious and difficult. All of us are unsure, nearly all we human beings, we're unsure whether we're worthy of love at the end of the day. We're unsure about whether we're worthy of our jobs. We're full of anxieties and stresses and priorities, and when you look at the world through Clancy's eyes, the world is a beautiful place in that he's confident of himself. He's confident of his lovability. He knows that he's worthy of love. He's got a lot of love to give, but he also knows that he's worthy of love. So that when we sit on the bed in the morning and we read the newspaper, there's this moment. Actually, Darcy used to do this too, but there's a moment where, I'll be reading a column by Julia Baird or something like that, and the nose will come in and sort of push my hand off the page, as if to say, I think you'll find Julia has troubled us with her views for long enough. There's a better use for that hand, which is to stroke the job. When he eats, he takes great pleasure in it. When he, Deborah and I, my partner and I, sometimes, we're so stressed with COVID. We are not meditators, but we've suddenly thought, maybe we need to get into meditation. So we've got the French lady on the tape, and we're lying on it. And but from a dog's from his point of view, what are they doing? There's a letter about this, but what are they doing? He finds it easy to relax. He just circles around 3 times and then collapses as if shot. It's easy. I love it when he goes to the park, and human beings, for all our best intentions, we see the world through ethnicity and race and sex and sexual preference and all this. He doesn't. He'll play. It doesn't matter what breed the dog is. It doesn't matter what size and shape. It doesn't matter if they're a bit ugly. It doesn't matter what that. He just understands that. He understands what we all would want to understand, really, which is that there's beauty in everybody and everything, and you should play with everybody and everything. So there's this kind of there's a deep dog wisdom that you get through just trying to see the world through their eyes, which is what I've tried to do.
So in the letters home, Clancy tells his parents that he lives in a shallow and materialistic part of Sydney called Sydney. And his first letter home to his parents, he is harsh but fair. His first letter home to his parents is a curious attempt to try and explain the weird behaviour of the people he now owns, whom he calls man and lady, how they react to his urinating, why man rides a bike with no wheels, strange inconsistencies in their actions. It's clear that Clancy thinks he's got a long and tough road ahead of him in terms of training these new humans. What were some of the funniest situations that you found yourself in with a new puppy after living for so long with an older dog?
Well, look, I hope it's not I hope none of it seems, he's very literary actually. He knows a lot of literature, which may seem fanciful, but I hope most of it doesn't feel fanciful. I hope most of it feels like, if you own a dog, you'll think, I've actually seen that in their eyes as well. They really do train you. You know, we had a system early on where, you know, I'd go and make tea for Deborah and I, and we'd bring it back and we'd read the newspaper with all those interruptions of, you know, come on, pat me. And then I'd later on go and give him his breakfast. And he absolutely trained me, you know, because when I went out to make the tea, he would just walk backwards and forwards from the food source to the bowl, from the food source to the bowl. And, you know, he must have done it 70 mornings in a row in a quite annoying way, at which point I thought, I might as well give him his breakfast now, you know. And you could see him thinking, oh,
at last.
yeah, they are trainable, these humans. They are trainable. And I do remember, you know, being on the exercise bike in the shed, and him running around me, you know, barking at me, barking. I'm sure he was, mate, you've been ripped off. This bike, the wheels, it's not going anywhere. You've been really, I'm sorry, but you've been ripped off. And so I think you can kind of tell what they're thinking. I mean, the other thing about his sort of self-confidence is, you know, if someone has the audacity to walk past our house on what they might think is a public thoroughfare at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he will go mad barking. And then I obviously remonstrate with him. I said, oh, you know, Clancy, don't make such a fuss. It's ridiculous. Just Daryl from next door, just, you know. And he does look up at me and think, oh, you know, I'm sorry, it's my job.
It's his job. That's what he's
I'm a guard dog. And really, do you really want to vouch for Daryl? Because, you know, you don't know. You don't know what I know. And that is absolutely the look in his face. So I've kind of tried to capture that really. I've tried to capture.
You have captured that.
The wisdom that they have about what's important in life.
Yeah. And even though
but also they're what I imagine is their acerbic commentary on the human world.
Yeah. I think there's a sense in his letters home to his parents, that even though he has a lot of complaints about you, man and lady, he also seems pretty satisfied, and most importantly, he seems to know that he's loved. Yeah. So getting back to that idea of love, what do you think it is about a dog's love, giving it and receiving it, that makes that human-dog bond so special? And do you think that humans like dogs more than dogs like humans, or do you think it's the other way around?
No, I think it's really, you know, some people talk about it as if it's quite a recent thing. It's some sort of, you know, suburban dysfunction or something like that, and that the history of dogs and humans, okay, they just used to guard the camp. You know, when we were all living on the savannah, they would guard the camp, and that's all that they would do. And I think that's a misreading of it. I mean, one of it's been around for a long time. The oldest literature we have is Homer, right? Homer's Odyssey. So is that 8th century BC? It's something like that. And in Homer's Odyssey, the best story in the Odyssey is a dog story. It's a story of Argos. So, you know, Odysseus has been on his big trip and for 10 years or something. And in his absence, Ithaca, his town, has fallen into rack and ruin, and all these sort of bad people, the suitors, have taken over. And he wants to sneak in and just see what's happening. So he goes in disguise. Now, meanwhile, before he left, he raised a puppy called Argos. He was hand raised by Odysseus. And so when he leaves, Argos just waits for him. But after 10 years, no one cares about Argos anymore. He's an old dog now. In the translation I use, which is the Daniel Mendelsohn translation, he's talked about as a reviled figure, sort of sitting on a you know, a muck heap outside the city gates. But and of course, when Odysseus comes, Argos knows instantly that it's his master, and he's just so relieved that he's finally back. But Odysseus is in disguise, so he cannot acknowledge the dog without giving everything away. So he steels himself and he walks up the steps, ignoring Argos. And Homer says, you know, a single tear trickled down Odysseus's face because he couldn't bear what he had to do. And at that moment, at that moment, this is a sadder scene in world literature. At that moment, Argos dies because Argos is happy. Argos doesn't need the pleasure of the pat. You know, that's not what Argos wants. Argos wants the satisfaction that Odysseus is back safely. And that's enough for him. And he's lived this long to see it. And he dies sort of happy, even though he gets nothing from it. It's this kind of incredible selflessness. There's a similar dog story in Tolstoy in War and Peace, which Shevchenko, I think is the dog's called, but he's the same. And Tolstoy talks explicitly about this receiving and giving of love, and how unusual that is in human relations, actually, but how common it is in this relationship of humans and dogs. It's a funny book, by the way. It's a comedy book.
It is very funny. You wouldn't tell it by what?
No,
by that last segment.
Tears. Well done.
No, it is very, very funny. So what do you think are Clancy's priorities in life? What's important to him? And does that make you reflect on your own priorities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he just, you know, the trendy word is mindfulness, isn't it? And he's instantly and automatically, and as they all are, he's mindful. He takes pleasure in the moment. He knows when there's an opportunity to sleep, you should sleep. He knows that when there's an opportunity to eat, you inhale dinner and then sort of nose around the bowl in the hope that more will be provided. You know, he loves to play. He just takes pleasure in the moment in this way. And when there's love to be given or received, he's really into it. He really wants to do that. So I think yes, there is this great. I mean, I hope the book is a tonic for these times in a way. I do wonder whether readers have particularly responded to it recently because, you know, we live in these particularly anxious times. But I think there is a lot of wisdom of what they. I think there's a lot of things we can learn from them. I guess, in their priorities.
Absolutely, yeah. Now Clancy's a Kelpie. And he would really love a good flock of sheep to round up, exactly. Or at a pinch, a bunch of chickens in the backyard.
Yes.
But the only physical work he seems to be able to accomplish at your place is digging. How's that working out for you both?
Yes, I think he writes in the letters about how he wants to take on Andrew Twiggy Forrest in the iron ore business, and he thinks the West Australians have had it on their own for too long, and so he's digging. Look, he still does dig quite a bit, and with you know, you talk about the things you can learn from them. One thing you can learn from them is compromise, the art of compromise. So there's one letter he writes about how, and this is all absolutely true. I mean, everything in the book's really true, but this beat for beat true is that he had all this digging on my lawn. And I thought, oh, I'm sick of this. So the part that he was digging incessantly at, I put these metal garden chairs over it so he couldn't get at it. And soon after I'd done that, we went out for the afternoon. And of course, when we came back, there was a fresh hole dug, as if iron ore mining, you know, as if he was in a hard hat, you know, PPE. Right outside the back door, you know, the worst possible position, and with him sort of lying I think he calls it his wallow hollow. So he's lying in his wallow hollow, saying, "Look at this; it's even bigger than the last one. Pretty good, huh?" Although I don't, you know, in his thought process is, I don't understand why you stuffed up my other one, you know, which I'd worked so hard, and then forced me to dig this. But you know, anyway, I've been through the work, I've done it, and of course. And then it's even worse, you know, because it's right. And so I really did think, okay, you win, you know, and I removed the chairs from the old one and put them on the new one and said, you know, okay, you continue there. That can be
have your old
yeah. Can I have the square meter outside the back door, please? So you do learn compromise, and you do learn that, you know, they do have quite a lot of. And rightfully so. They've got an opinion, and they've got a right to be heard. I think, you know. Well, yes, you're the boss. I understand that. You can't let them rule the household. I understand that they have to be trained. They have to be
Are you talking about the humans now or the dogs?
Yeah, well, just as they train the humans, the humans do have to train them. And I don't go for people who don't train their dogs, and I think the dogs are happier if there's a structure of training. But certainly they have to be allowed to train their humans as well.
Clancy calls your, rather cheekily calls your house Chateau Chaos. He writes home from Chateau Chaos. Is that a fair description of what goes on at your place?
No, I don't think. I think a lot of his descriptions are incorrect. You know, people in literary circles talk about the unreliable narrator. You know, the great example is The Remains of the Day. You know, a novel like that, whereby the intelligent reader reads the book and thinks, "Oh, what the narrator is telling me is a load of rubbish." And I hope when people read Clancy's letters home, at some points they'll think, "I'm not on his side." There's a piece about the visit of TJ. So we've got some friends, you know, who brought their dog, and Clancy formed a very dim view of the dog, you know, who comes from the posh eastern suburbs of Sydney, and he formed a very, very dim view of this. And you know, and I think any intelligent reader would think at the end of the letter, even though Clancy's singing his own praises and saying how badly treated Clancy was, any reader would think, "I'm on TJ's side."
I think so.
He's a pretty good dog, but he's not perfect.
He's not perfect. Oh, okay. He there's no polite way to put this, but he seems to like your wife more than you.
Well, I think.
How do you explain that?
Very wise judgment on that. Yes, no, he loves Lady, and he thinks Lady is very sensible in the way she. And he has a dimmer view of me. That's true. Yes, but you know, he says quite explicitly at times, you know, I love man, and I think that's right. I think, you know, again, I hope I'm not putting words into his mouth, because I think he does.
I think he might.
Let's see.
Hey, tell us about the morning.
If I give him cheese, he'll love me particularly. Hey.
You got cheese there. Okay, here we go. Cameo appearance from Clancy. Oh, look, he's gorgeous.
Look, so handsome, isn't he? You're handsome dog, Clancy.
He is the best dog in the world, Richard.
Yeah, I didn't need that hand.
Hey, tell us about the morning wake-up ritual that he had when he was a puppy, when he first came to your house.
Oh, well, he just thinks that.
Or maybe he still does it, does he?
Well, yeah, he does. He just thinks it's ridiculous that we read the newspaper and we read books, and in fact, we had it on Sunday. We were doing that thing. We were both reading really good books at the moment, and so we were just lying in bed, and the tone of voice, you know, was just from him was absolutely, I'm just sick of these books. What's the point of these books? This is what? It's rubbish.
You can't eat them.
Well, you can actually. I cite Wallace Stegner's Crossing to Safety, which is, according to him, delicious. So you can eat them. That was very, very early on. We had this great moment which he writes about in the book, where he recounts. See, I think one of the things from their point of view is they like action and adventure, right? They like things to be happening. So curiously, we end up training them in the wrong direction, really. So that at the point that he grabs Wallace Stegner's Crossing to Safety off the bottom shelf in the hallway and runs out into the backyard, and it happens to be one of Deborah's favourite books. So she's racing after him, shouting, "No, not the Stegner." From a dog's point of view, this is the most marvellous day he's ever had. This is great. So they must,
a lot of attention.
They just must imagine that we're training them to do that, because why else we would? You know, the other training thing is, in our case, we don't like him to go. We've got quite a small kitchen and it's dangerous, so we're trying to train him not to go into the kitchen. But of course, he only actually gets a treat if he stands outside the kitchen, then goes into the kitchen and then retreats when told. That's when he gets a treat. So in what sense are you not training him to do just that?
The opposite.
Because he never gets a treat when he doesn't even bother going near the kitchen, which is actually the idea.
I think you're starting to get it worked out. It's taken you taken you 15 years with Darcy, but I think maybe now with Clancy.
Yeah, and look, I think one of the advantages of the book, which is not entirely, but mostly written as we went, is that it does capture the change in him, which is that it does start off with a lot of these misadventures, but as the book goes on, he sort of grows from that puppy into, in his case, a quite mature dog activist who's concerned about dog rights and concerned about the language we use about dogs and the naming of dogs and, you know, various other issues of dog rights. So he does. You do get to sense with Clancy how he changes as he gets older, which they all do. You know, they all mature and grow, and you know, which is partly the lovely thing of being friends with them.
Yes, yes. One of the lessons that you say that Clancy and all dogs have to teach humans is life is not perfect. You cannot have everything you want, and sometimes you have to compromise, which is what you were talking about before, about compromising. And I think things like, you know, you were speaking before about Clancy's role, he sees his role as being the protector of the household. And so why are you getting cross with him when he barks at strangers who walk, you know, so it's all very complicated. Do you think that we should praise humans as much as we praise dogs? Yeah,
absolutely. I think that thing about lovability is I think at the heart of it really, that that this idea that we've got, that, you know, I think look, some people listening will not understand this and think, well, what are you talking about? And other people will. And if you don't understand this, then just be grateful. But a lot of people, I don't know, 60% of people, 70% of people, at least half of people, I'm sure, have got this really negative self-talk in their head. And we are constantly criticizing ourselves and talking about ourselves in a way you wouldn't talk about your worst friend. We fail to go off at the traffic lights, and we say to ourselves, oh, well, that'd be right. You can hardly drive, you idiot. And, you know, there might be even a few swear words along that. We feel we're kind of unworthy, and that we're fakes at our jobs, and that we don't deserve love, and that we stuff up things all the time. And we talk about ourselves in this negative self-talk all the time. And that's, I think, part of the reason that they are so pleasurable to be with, and it's so pleasurable to sort of enter the world through their eyes, is that there's none of that. When he guards the house, you know, there's a little piece in there where, you know, he's writing about me having all these little security ideas for when we leave the house. So I have a radio left on, and I might leave the light and the fan on to create and I've got this really good idea whereby I've got an old pair of boots, big boots, and I'll put them outside the front door, and I'll describe to Deborah how this is going to work, because if a robber comes, they'll look at these boots, you know, size 11, and they'll think there's some huge bloody tradie who's just kicked off the boots, and he's sitting right inside that front door with legs akimbo, and, you know, so I better not rob this house. And Clancy overhears all this, and actually along the way criticises me for akimbo, because he thinks, I mean, I've got a big vocabulary, but akimbo, that's pretentious. But anyway, so he's critical of the way I set this up, but of course he's even more critical when we finally come home, and I say to Deborah as we walk up the front, see, no robbery, the boots have worked again. And Clancy says, mate, the boots haven't worked. It was your loyal dog who was there barking every time someone walked past. That was what saved the robbery. Don't you get it? Which is confident, you know, it's just seeing the world through an understanding that they're worthy. And I know it's weird that that's an unusual thing or a pleasurable thing to think about, but I think for most people it is a pleasurable thing to think about. How it would be if you similarly saw the world through eyes that understood how worthy you were, how worthy of love, and how you were just trying to do the right thing. And Clancy, this is, again, I don't think it's fanciful. I think Clancy is certain that he's worthy of love and certain that he's doing the right thing. even when he's not.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, so we have a lot to learn from dogs.
Yeah.
What do you reckon? What do you think annoys Clancy most about you?
Oh, just that the service isn't as quick. I often say to him, "What did your last servant die of? Nothing to do." When the water bowl is empty, he just whacks it with his paw, so the whole thing flips up noisily.
He's letting you know.
No,
What do you think he appreciates most about you?
Look, I think he. Well, I'm very attentive to him. You know, I you know, there's a point in the morning where, you know, I do now feed him as trained. So when I get up, I put the kettle on to boil, I instantly get his food. So he has it, it's worked. And he says in the book to other young dogs, look, do realize that they are trainable. You know, you've got to put the effort in, result out, you know, 70 times, it will work. There's nothing worse than just, you know, not. So he gets what he wants. And then I get into bed with Deborah and the tea, and we read the newspaper, and he gets up on the bed and he sort of just gets sick of it really quickly. Just gets sick of it and thinks, what are they thinking? Like, do they expect do they expect that the CIA is going to ring up and say, what's happened in Belarus? We need to know. We haven't had time to concentrate on ourselves. We need this suburban couple in Sydney to, you know, because we're reading it with such intensity. So he just gets sick of it and he jumps off the bed and then there's a moment where I take off my glasses. They've got such great hearing. I mean, we should talk about their abilities actually, because they're amazing. But all I do is I quite quietly put down the paper, but then I take off the glasses and I put them on my bedside table. And by that time, he might be up the other end of the house, but he knows that's a signal that they've stopped reading those fucking newspapers. So he storms down and leaps onto the bed like, you know, something from the Dresden bombing, and lands in between us. And at that point, we put down the newspapers, and so we can do what we really should have been doing from the beginning, which is one on either side of him.
He's really got you trained quite well.
Patting him and saying he's a good dog and the best dog ever, and singing him songs. You know.
I was going to ask you about the song. So you often sing Clancy a song that you made up about him.
Yeah, I sing.
Which Clancy says would reach a larger audience if placed in the hands of a composer with a basic grip of rhyme, metre or melody, or a singer who could hold a tune.
He's so cruel, isn't he? Do you want to hear the song?
Cool. So you can, I would like. I was going to ask you if you'd give us a taste of the song.
Judge his half judgment,
okay?
And maybe find that Clancy isn't the. Okay, the song goes, he's Clancy the flying dog. He's Clancy the flying dog. Where he lands, no one knows, because no one knows where he's taken off. Now, he says in the book, I think it's unlikely to trouble the judges at the Grammys. And maybe that's true.
I think he's right, Richard. I'm sorry, but
yeah, it's true.
I think he might be right on that one.
He's got his cheese song, which is at about sort of 9 o'clock. There's this moment where we've all had dinner long ago and we've been watching television, and then he sort of sits at Deborah's feet, and he does. In the book we talk a lot about he talks about his performance pieces. He's got various statues and performance pieces.
I was going to ask about that. It's almost like interpretive dance.
Yeah, and look, there are various ones. There's the standing at the back door, which is a statue entitled, you know, a brace of pheasants have just been shot and I need to go and pick them up. Please open the back door. The other one that comes at 9 o'clock every night is just called Best Dog in the World. And that's him sitting very tidily with his paws lined up and in front, and his head held high and his big kelpie ears up like this. And then he starts singing, and it's his cheese song. And then he sings for a while, and then Deborah says, oh, get him some cheese. Yeah. And then I go up to the fridge and I get him some cheese, and I think since I'm up, I might as well get a beer for myself. And then Deborah says, since you're up, why don't you get some of those strawberries and put a few nuts on top and a bit of yogurt? And a celebratory mood breaks out in the household, which is all
from Clancy's singing.
Is all he's doing.
Just how much does he like cheese? It sounds like he likes cheese.
He loves cheese. Look, I'll demonstrate yet again if you like. Hey, Clance, do you want some cheese? Thank you.
That cheese disappeared pretty fast.
It's pretty fast. Look, I think there is a point of the book where he talks about people criticising dogs. And again, this is based on a true thing down in the park. There's these two pugs, little pugs, and their owner has put them in these little robes, little kind of jumpsuit things. And on the side of each of them, in huge print, it says, "Do not feed me." It's really offensive. You know, they're sort of purple cassocks with these hot pink letters, "Do not feed me." And this sends Clancy, as you can imagine, just into this sort of paroxysm of dog rights and how, you know, would human beings do that? Can you imagine if human beings put signs on them, you know, who's
on
running?
Your children.
Yeah, who's running this thing? Judges. You know, he's absolutely appalled by it. And then he gives lots of examples of how dogs are treated in a way that human beings would never treat themselves. And you know, he does in that letter admits to one personal failing, which is inhaling his food. So the food lasts half a second. You know, a plate of chicken, gone. And he does admit that's a fault, and he does think that he should maybe work on that. But he abhors the idea that just because of this fault, he'd be required to wear some sort of sign saying inhales his food, like these poor pugs.
The poor pugs in the park. I'm just checking the time. Oh, we've got a few more minutes before we'll go to questions. I've got, so many questions. Clancy, he's such a character. Catching flies. Why is that such a big deal for dogs?
Yes, it's strange, isn't it? But I think again, that's taking pleasure in small things, isn't it? He writes a very short letter about that, which just I don't know if I can even find it. It's a very short letter. And he just says, is it this one? Let me see. Oh no, that's another short letter. Anyway, I probably can't find it in a hurry. But he just says about catching flies that here we go. Dear Mum and Dad, I caught a fly today. It seems worth a letter home. I've been snapping at them non-stop for months without success. It had become an idée fixe, an obsession, a sickness of the mind. Now I've caught one, I wonder what my obsession was all about. I've been told that most wild game tastes like chicken. This is not true of fly. Fly, I've discovered, tastes like fly. Love Clancy. Most of the letters are longer than that, but you know, he gets to the point. But you see,
he's very opinionated. Do you think that he's a good judge of character in people? He has opinions about beards, for example, on men.
No, he has a lot of very harsh opinions, I think. And again, that's the unreliable narrator, I think. There'll be points which he makes a lot of judgments about our friends, which I don't think are true. But as you can see, he's got quite a high elevated literary style.
Yeah, he does.
Which I think is nice, because there's some humour books about dogs where it's all about, I don't know, it seems to be very obsessed with their poo and smelling each other's bums, and I just don't go for that myself. I don't think it's the essence of what's happening, and I don't think it's that interesting. And I think actually they're full of wisdom and love, and I think there's certainly humour in it, and there's humour in their askance view of the ridiculousness of human beings, and I think there is some humour in their self-confidence in defiance of reality, but I don't. But I think what's funny about it is actually to see them as the elevated.
He's gone. Oh, he wants his tummy rubbed. Did you train him to do that?
Now you see,
It's the small things, isn't it?
that's not worth a sort of 5-month course of meditation in a cave in France. I don't know what is.
What was his take on your when you and Deborah decided to take up mindfulness and meditation? What was his view on that?
Oh, he just thinks it's hilarious, and again, this is absolutely based on what happened. Is we were lying on the. They just love it if you lie on the floor, and so we found on Spotify or something some French lady doing the voice and telling us to concentrate on the universal love and relaxing each part of your body. And he really did lie down next to us. So we were lying on our backs like this. He was lying down on his side with the paws out, and he just doesn't think much of it. He says he gives up at the moment. She says, "Relax your elbow." He says, "I don't even have an elbow." What's she talking about? Lovely things. They're lovely. Look, I just want to capture what lovely things are, and this sense of, I'll just let him know. He's sick of us. Yeah. Bye.
He said our time's up. He's had enough.
He's sick of you. Yeah, I think you'll find Cass has caught our interest for long enough.
Yeah. The spotlight needs to be back on him.
No, he does use a few lines. He does. There are sort of. I don't approve of this sort of plagiarism, but he does borrow the odd line from Jane Austen. I notice in one of them, he's borrowed a line from Tony Hancock's 1956 comedy sketch, The Blood Donor.
He's very well read.
How he finds these things, I don't know, but it's literary theft. And I pointed out in the acknowledgements. Poor Galton and Simpson,
There's so many great stories in this book about Clancy and the robotic vacuum cleaner, Clancy's friends, Clancy and the Great Ham incident. We could talk all night. I did want to just quickly revisit the fact that he's a dog's rights activist, because at the end of the book, he particularly focuses on that. What are some of the examples of the phrases that humans use that he finds particularly offensive?
Well, he doesn't like, a lot of it, man's best friend is obviously fine. But when you learn typing and you say the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Well, why is this yellow-eyed predator quick and jumping over a lazy dog? Why is the man's, the faithful hound suddenly rendered late? Why isn't it the other way around? Why isn't it the lazy yellow-eyed predator jumps over, he writes about, a dog act, and he writes about how when a film is bad, it's called a dog. Why is that? He says the most recent bad film to be called a dog is Cats. How fair is that? He writes about that whole thing of a dog ate my homework, and how unlikely that is. Like you can already tell that the student is creating a story, because if your real dog ate your homework, you'd say, my dog Rex ate my homework, not a dog. How likely is it that this house is full of random strays moving through the home? He writes about, he gets very upset about the doggy bag in restaurants.
Rightly so.
Yeah, and people ask for a doggy bag, and he says the waiter, who's probably a dog lover, he instantly fusses around and gets the thing. And he wants to point out that most of the humans who take a doggy bag eat the food on the way home. It doesn't ever get home to the dog. In fact, most people who ask for a doggy bag don't even have a dog. So he's quite angry about that. And I'm with him. I'm with him on that.
I'm with him too. We might see if we've got some audience questions. If not, I have a lot more we could chat about. But Emma Kate, Do we have any questions from the audience?
We do. We have plenty. I was just trying to get my dog Zephyr to stay in here, but he wants to go back to his bed, so he's just abandoned me. Yeah, we've had lots of questions and comments coming through. Janie says, Richard, this is possibly covered in your book, but how did Clancy come to be in your life? I had a beloved King Charles Molly who definitely chose me when I went to get my first dog.
No, well, we just got him from the same farm that we'd got the previous dog, so I haven't got as good a story as that. We did choose him, but I still have really good memories of going to pick him up, you know, and taking our son and his partner with us, and him being this sort of tiny, this is in country New South Wales, in basically Orange, and us coming back. And I can still really remember this sort of tiny little, slightly scared creature, you know, peeking out, and them cuddling him in the back seat. And you know, he stayed that. The picture on the cover, I don't know if you can see that, but that's when he's really still quite little, you know, sitting on the veranda at our bush house, you know, just a little bunch of personality, really. And then, you know, they grow and they get wiser and more mature, as we all do, of course.
Jane says, have you considered a letter back to Clancy from his mum and dad? Do they miss him? Is he seen as the successful one of the litter? Has he made it in the big smoke and his siblings less accomplished than he?
No, well, there is a letter. He regards one of his successes. He writes a letter towards the end of the book about the visit of because our sons are grown up now and they've both got their own houses. And he writes about, he writes first of all about how during their teenage years, they didn't leave home. And he's troubled by that. There's a period when they're 10, 11, 12 years old, when they can feed themselves and they can clean themselves. And he's really worried, he's really wondering why human children stay at home for so long. And he points out that he himself is quite successful, even though he left home at 2 months or whatever it is. And he left his mum and dad behind, and he forged his own way, and he's very successful in life. And he writes this piece about, these human children requiring such a long period of attention from their mothers and fathers, unnecessarily so, he thinks. And then he writes about this day where they both come home, and this is back to Odysseus. He says, it's like Odysseus coming back to Ithaca. It's like, the climactic scene of Lord of the Rings. It's like, and how we as the parents are sort of rushing around. Deborah's cooking the favourite food. I'm trying to do the, oh, son, do you want to park your car under the shade? Like anything goes. It's like the Situation Room in the White House, incoming, quick, we've got to do everything. And he likes our two sons, and the letter ends with him sitting under the table and them secretly feeding him chicken when we're not watching. So his conclusion is that they're nice young men, and maybe that's because they spent such a long time being parented, but really it is a bit unnecessary. Look at him.
Bronwyn had a comment on the giving and receiving of love from dogs that was mentioned earlier in the evening. And she says, she mentions the story of Hachiko in Japan, wonders if you're familiar with it, and says a statue of a dog, for those who aren't, is a major meeting place outside Shibuya Station in Tokyo. And she says, how about placing a statue of Darcy and eventually Clancy somewhere in Sydney?
Yes. Well, that's a lovely story, isn't it? About the dog that waited for its master for, I can't remember now, 14 years or 10 years or something. It's absolutely ridiculous. But no, there is this incredibly loyal bond that they have. And I think they would do a bit like that story of the dog that saves the guy that I mentioned in the house fire. There is this enormous loyalty that they have. We don't deserve them, really, but we have them.
Mm-hmm. And we have a last question from Bianca, but really from Chili, Bianca's dog, who would like to know if Clancy has doggy dreams and what philosophies come from Clancy's dreams. And would also like to, Chili would also like to know whether Clancy has any special talents, because Chili's is surviving having eaten 2 blocks of chocolate at Grandma's by accident.
Oh, chocolate's bad for them. Yeah, that's right. Look, I think that it is lovely watching them have dreams, and they often, they often, well, he often barks in this very restrained way. So it's a little sort of a shadow bark. Oh, 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 oh. And I imagine that he's perpetually, because again, this is about humans and dogs and what we can learn from them. When I have dreams, they're often really anxious. You know, they're you know, you're nude in the exam room or some version of that. But I'm sure in his dreams, well, what they sound like to me is that he's perpetually chasing rabbits in a beautiful green field under a blue sky.
Lovely. Richard and Cass, thank you so much for tonight's discussion. Those are all the questions that we've had come through. So I might throw back to you both, unless you to see.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a couple more in before we finish. Just on Clancy's wisdom and his take on life and the lessons that he's obviously teaching you, Richard, and that dogs can teach people. A couple of his quotes that I really love. One is, "We're not here for long, people. Enjoy it." Which I think is what you were talking about earlier, about that they find pleasure everywhere, they have no self-esteem issues, and they're pretty tolerant of other people.
I think that is at the end of a long letter about appearance and how human beings are obsessed with appearance and how it doesn't matter. And he talks about his friend Gus, who's got really short legs, but he's got a big body and short legs. And to some people he might look absurd, but not to Clancy, because that guy really knows how to use those legs. And he does. He does. And so, yeah, we're not here for long, and just enjoy and understand that beauty is, see, some of these are almost cliches they are cliches of human wisdom, but we don't act by them, but he does. So beauty is only skin deep. He really believes it. You know, he doesn't not play with a dog because it's got a white and black spots on it, you know, in a weird way. You know, there's dogs who've got 1 white leg and 3 black legs. He thinks he writes in the letter about how the friend of his that's like that. It's really good because he can see him from a distance and he can know it's him. And that's good because he's a great dog.
He kind of simplifies everything, doesn't he? He distills it down to its essence.
Wouldn't you like it if you could treat all human beings as if it's underneath the surface? That's important.
Yeah. Another life lesson he writes about is, as you grow older, it may be sensible to give up the obsessions that make your life miserable, especially when you can no longer recall why they became so compelling in the first place.
Yeah.
I really love that one.
This is partly a story about Darcy, really, who I mentioned we got a bush block, and really early on in Darcy's life, when we went up there, there was a sheep carcass on one side of the fence. So I threw it over the fence so that he couldn't get to it. And it just imprinted on his young doggy mind, this carcass. So the next time we come up, maybe 3 weeks later, the carcass is long gone, but he just focuses on this bit of fence. And so every time we go up from then on, for years, he would run up and down this little bit of fence as if it was his duty, as if he was, this is not Clancy. I don't know if Clancy would do this ever actually, but this was because they're different. And he just became totally obsessed with it. And he would run up and down, almost creating a slot in the earth. And you'd call him away from it and he'd come. He was a well-behaved dog. But then when you weren't looking, he'd return to this task. It was a Sisyphean task that he felt he had to do. It was his job in the world, even though it kind of made him a bit miserable, I think. And it was so intense that we've got a friend called Matthew Paris, who's a political columnist with the Times in London, and he was up there and he watched this behaviour. And this is some time ago when they were first talking about Brexit. And Matthew wrote this 2,000-word, one of those beautiful British essays that was in the Times about his friend Darcy the dog and this obsession that he had, even though he really couldn't remember why anymore. And Matthew wrote about how this was like the Brexit MPs. and that they had this urge that they didn't ever really know where it had come from, but they were, and this was published, and Deborah and I were so mad. We've dreamt our whole lives of having an article written about us in the Times of London. It was a bloody dog.
Nobody's interested in you. They're only interested in Darcy and Clancy.
Exactly. But then, yeah, when he got older, as he got older and wiser, by the time he was sort of 10, he would do it for a while. But when you called him away, he would come to you with some relief, as if, oh, thank God, I'm off the hook. Let someone else do it. I know it has to be done, but let someone else do it.
Let someone else have a go.
And then finally, when he was really old, he gave up on it, and it was very nice to see. So yes, give up your obsessions, especially if you can no longer remember why.
Yes. Yeah.
The deep
well, Richard, Love Clancy is, as you said in the beginning, every dog owner you know says that they're lucky and that they own the best dog that there ever was. And of course, you know that Clancy is the best dog that ever was, and before that it was Darcy. But this book is certainly a beautiful love letter to Clancy and from Clancy, and a meditation on what really matters in life. So thank you so much for sharing on behalf of Clancy.
Well, Cass, you wrote the first review of it and went on Goodreads and all of that, and you so perfectly captured the book and what I was trying to do with the book. I'm so grateful that my first notice, if you like, was from you, and it was so perfect and so accurate.
Thank you so much, Richard. Back to you, Emma Kate.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Richard and Cass. That was absolutely lovely discussion and brilliant questions. I'm going to take you all off mute now so that you can join me in thanking Richard and Cass, and I can see some dogs there, so we can also introduce them. So you should now all be off mute. Does that work?
Hey. I'll change my speaker view so I can see everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Oh, look, there's Bianca's dog.
Have a lovely night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. Bye, Clancy.
Thank you.